Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about the factor theorem. The factor theorem is going to help us to factorize cubic expressions and cubic equations. So we know a way to factorize quadratics, so here's a way it's going to help us to factorize cubics. If we think about quadratics, x squared plus 2x minus 3, we had a way to do that where we put an x at the front here and we think of two numbers that multiply to give me this number and add to give me 2. So we know that method for factorizing those quadratics. So what we can see that if the factors are x minus 1 and x plus 3, we know that the zeros of this function, in other words the values of x that make f of x 0, are just x equals 1 and x equals negative 3. Okay, the values of x that make each one of those brackets equal to 0. So that means that if I substitute 1 into this equation, I get 0. Or if I substitute negative 3 into this equation, I also get 0. Okay, so we can extend that now and kind of reverse it. We're going to reverse the process now, do this thing down here at the bottom, and then hence find out what the factors are of the quadratic, or in this case, the cubic. So here we've got a cubic here with an x cubed in it. We want to factorize it. So ideally we want it in 3 different brackets. So let's try and guess a number that when we substitute into there, we get 0. So you can start guessing. The number on the end there is a good clue. 3 means that 3 numbers in the end of these brackets have got to multiply to give me 3. So I haven't got many options here. I've got 1 and negative 1. I've got 3 and negative 3. That's all we can have. So let's try negative 1. I substitute negative 1 into f of x. I do the calculation and I get negative 1. So that's no good. That's not going to work. We want 0. Negative 1 plus 7, negative 9 plus 3. Substitute them all in and we get 0. So in this case we do get 0. That tells me if I put negative 1 in there and I get 0 out, that tells me that x plus 1 is a factor. Remember, it's always the value of x that makes the bracket 0. So if negative 1 gives you 0 here, it's x plus 1 that's a factor. If it was positive 1 that gave you 0, then x minus 1 would be a factor. Okay, so we know the factor theorem tells us that if we substitute in a into the polynomial, it could be any polynomial, it doesn't have to be a cubic, it could be a quartic or higher, then we know that x minus a is a factor. That is the factor theorem. So we've gone ahead and let's do this one, x cubed minus 2x squared plus 3x minus 2. Again, we can see we've only got a very few options here, either 1 or negative 1, 2 or negative 2. Let's try 1. Let's see what we get here. So we get 1 cubed minus 2 plus 3 minus 2, which is 0. Bingo, first time we found that 1 works. So that means x minus 1 is a factor. Once we've found one of the factors, now we've just got to divide that factor into the cubic using synthetic division or long division, either one of those. And then we've got to factorize the quadratic that we're left with. Okay, so let's factorize fully this one here. So this one was an 8 on the end there. So we've got a number of different possibilities. Let's try. Let's try 1. If we do 1, we get 12 out. So that's no good. Not equal to 0. So let's try minus 1. If we do that, we do get 0. So that means x plus 1 is a factor. So now, how do we find this extra quadratic factor here? Well, we just divide this by this. Synthetic division or long division. So let's finish this off. We've found that x plus 1 is a factor of this cubic. So that means when I divide x plus 1 into the cubic, I get a remainder of 0. So we know it's a factor. So how can we find the quadratic factor? Right, let's use synthetic division. So let me set it up. We've got x cubed minus 2x squared plus 5x plus 8. We're just writing the coefficients. Remember, if you haven't got an x squared term or an x term or a number term, you need to put a 0 there. Because x plus 1 is a factor, we're going to write negative 1 out here. That's the value that you put in that gives you 0. And straight down here we write 1, whatever that number is. Okay, multiply these two terms here. Negative 1 times 1 gives you negative 1. Add these two terms here, gives you negative 3. Multiply negative 1 and negative 3, giving you positive 3. Add these two terms here, giving you 8. Then negative 1 times positive 8 is -8. Add these two terms here, gives you 0. And that's what we're expecting there at the end, because we knew that the remainder was going to be 0 there. So this tells us that the quotient is x squared minus 3x plus 8. So if we put it all together now, f of x, if we factorize it, is x plus 1 times x squared minus 3x plus 8. Now my next step is to try and factorize this thing right here. So a quick check of the discriminant, b squared minus 4 times a times c, shows me that we're going to get a negative number. Therefore, this quadratic here on the end does not factorize. So we've gone as far as we can. So if the question says factorize as much as possible, there's our cubic factorized as much as possible.